A few students told me that they were struggling with thinking about how to start this project, so I figured I would just do a quick demo video. So, what I did here was I just went around my room with a tape measure and I took some quick and dirty measurements that were all done based on the interior walls. And right now, what I'm doing is just calculating like what some of these measurements would be in inches to scale. So I'm going to do this entire drawing demo without an architect scale because I know a lot of you don't have one at home. So the first thing that I'm going to do right now is just tape the paper down in each quarter, and then I'm going to use the boxes to represent just a foot. Since I'm using a 1/4 inch piece of graph paper, each one of those boxes can be the equivalent of 1 foot of space. Now, in some instances, I am going to have like half a feet or 3 inches, so then I'm going to have to just use my ruler to kind of reference that. But for now, I'm just kind of measuring out in full inches what some of these walls would be, and I'm just going to mark out the pathway around the room in scale for the interior walls. And so here I am just taking some measurements with my ruler, just based off of that map I made on the other sheet to just match up some of these measurements that I have going in the scale and just working my way around the perimeter of the room. And then later on, I'm going to add in features like where the doors go and where the outside of the walls are as well. So I've been including features such as like where the edges of all of the doors are, and now I'm just marking out the thickness of the walls, keeping in mind that two of the walls in this space are exterior walls. So I'm going to make those exterior ones on the right side and the bottom of my page a little bit thicker or just wider of walls, and then my interior walls are a little bit thinner. So I opted to just kind of go with a generic 8-inch for the exterior and 6-inch for the interior. Now that I have the wall thickness and the opening for my doors done, I am going to start adding in some additional features such as where the doors um, go and which way they swing. I'm not going to worry too much about adding in lots of specific details because this is still just a rough draft for my piece of graph paper. So I can focus on just really mapping out and trying to get everything in order. And then I can go trace over it onto my tracing paper. And so I've got my tracing paper. I'm actually going to trace over this twice so I don't bother measuring the paper to any particular size. I just put my straight edge there so I can get a good cut. And I'm not even going to bother again trying to place this in any particular spot on this tracing paper because I know that it's going to be worth my time to trace this over twice than to try to draw it perfectly the first time I go and trace. The other thing I like to do, and you'll see it a couple of times in the drawing process, is I keep like a regular sheet of just printer paper or bond paper around to put underneath the trace in between the graph and the trace paper. This way I can just make sure that I've traced over everything evenly. I've just grabbed a triangle to use as a straight edge. That way I can just keep all of my lines nice and neat and orderly. And I tend to try to work by doing just like all of the vertical lines and then all the horizontal lines. But you'll see I tend to miss quite a few of them, so I will have to go back on occasion. But that's okay ultimately in the end. Now that I've got my walls measured and laid out, I'm just adding in my door symbols. So I'm measuring out the length of the door to be the equivalent of whatever the width of the door is. This particular door here is about 4 feet wide. It's the utility room door, so it's a little bit wider for whatever reason, but that's okay. So I'm just making the door as long as the opening is wide so that way it fits in nice and evenly. In some of the doors, I'll actually go back and change them to a different style swing just because of the way that I'm going to have dimensions set up in my room and like furniture layouts, is that having the doors fully open to show the full extent of the swing is going to just make my the rest of my drawing look a little bad and ultimately not going to suit the need that I want in this particular drawing, which is okay that I just kind of decided after the fact I'll go back and I'll change it up, which is another reason why it's good that I knew this was not going to be my final version. So again, I'm just going to go through and lay out some of my doors and windows, and then I'm going to start doing the basic layout of my furniture plan for here as well. Now, as I start doing some of the furniture, I take my time of just looking at some of it. Now, I was doing this project um, at my desk at work versus this is then a drawing of my at-home space. So I didn't have exact measurements for pieces of furniture. So some of them I was just kind of guessing, and then I decided to go back and change some of them up. Um, Also, just kind of doing a lot of it off of memory or just basic measurements for typical pieces, and also just trying to keep things proportional with the doors. Once I had some furniture laid out, trying to think about how each one of those pieces would relate to each other size wise, but I just kind of laid everything out. I also then, after some time, went back and labeled each piece just for like my own information about what each part was, since a lot of times pieces of furniture just look like blocks. But ultimately, when I did my final version, I decided to keep those labels out. And with that, this is how I just started doing the layout for my at home workspace plan. I later went over it again with another piece of tracing paper to kind of reposition it onto a good spot on a final version, and then added in dimensions and a title block and view title. So I have a copy of that part that I'll show you in class, but I unfortunately didn't record that part for this video.